I think maybe I might start for our table because I have to confess that I was really bad and I did not have time to do my flip charts because we were so focused here. So I'm going to start, and please don't think that I'm providing any role modeling for you here, other tables. But we began with collaboration and involvement of stakeholders. And there were some really interesting suggestions. One of them was that this process isn't particularly user-friendly, that it is confusing and it's hypothetical, and it may scare away people that would like to otherwise be involved. And so if BLM could create sort of a planning for dummies handout, if there could be a visual such as Vanessa suggested earlier, if there could be flow charts that would show how this is inclusive of other processes and not adding another layer, that would be really helpful. It's too abstract right now. It needs to be concrete and visualized. Second thing is what we're doing here, I think, and that is having bigger processes. So if you're in southwest Montana versus northeast Idaho, it's a little hard to get over the mountain ranges to see one another. So if you can be on the web, if you can be on the phone, if you can get a copy of what happened, and if it's reliable, that will be helpful for people to be able to participate. The next one is to have a predictable conduit process from a local to regional level so that people can really participate on the local level and know that that is being taken to the regional level. I'm going to ask my group after each of these. To make participation a real goal, to make effective outreach an outcome in itself, to look at how outreach can be meaningful and creative. And finally, transparency. Being sure that somehow public comments are available when they need to be during the planning process, to be sure to maybe have web-based maps that people can actually look at, see what's wrong with the top of that mountain and comment on it from people's different standpoints in real time. Group, did I leave anything out of the collaboration piece? Or would you like to add anything? Do you want to add, Vanessa? Making scoping comments available in the middle of the process rather than at the end. Yeah, that's what she just said, making the planning process available, the scoping process available during the plan. The second thing we discussed was landscape. And I think I have to summarize it by saying that it was confusing and that there's an opportunity for overlap and inconsistency, and that there needs to be a real vision and definition and effort at the very beginning to be sure that it's defined well, and that there's a possibility, there are too many possibilities for overlap and problems. And I know I can't really say too much more because I'm not one of you. Do you want to say something more? I can see from your face you do.
I mean, the concern was that you started dealing with all these big programmatic EISs in sort of an opportunistic way instead of having a vision for where you want to go from the beginning. And I think it's really important that there's a vision and that this is intentional and that it's not opportunistic. And I think obviously you have to be opportunistic at times, but there needs to be, what are these landscapes? And I think those need to be defined at the beginning.
The third thing, I'm trying to make this in 5 minutes. The third thing that we talked about is what works well. And what was defined as working well was a problem that maybe this doesn't exactly also work well and isn't necessarily efficient, but what works well is a lot of upfront planning, a lot of research, and a lot of data collection, and to establish a baseline so that you know where you're operating from at the beginning. And the more that happens, the more effective and successful a plan is, with definitions of what in the world we mean and what the words are, and to be sure that there's understanding of the definitions and agreement on definitions. And that also may mean that something takes longer, even that it's going to be a more successful project, but it's going to take longer. You want to add to that? Is that kind of what we said? Yes? Okay. Final thing, efficiency. Well, there's a worry that, and I think BLM has said that they understand this, but there's not, that in the efforts to make something efficient, that you not leave so much wiggle room, that there needs to be clarity. There needs to be clarity about the RMPs and what should be moved to the implementation bag and what should stay with the RMP, and that there need to be standards and criteria for that bright line at the beginning. More? I think that's the end of our report back. If anybody has any questions for my table, you can raise your hand and I'll give you a microphone, but otherwise I'm going to move. Ryan, are you ready? I'm going to move to the next table. Or do you like to be next? Oh.
We're all
Clamoring.
clamoring.
Ooh.
Okay. All right, this is a collaborative effort with this table, so they're going to chime in where I get it wrong or I miss something, right? We organized our discussion really into the 3 different goals and concerns, ideas, and suggestions for, and just sort of key issues under each one. So in terms of the landscape level planning goal, I think there were some concerns and also some real sense of possibility and promise. I think there was, to echo this group, there was a strong sense that upfront planning and comprehensive planning about what resources exist at the landscape scale, what the capacity is, et cetera, can avoid duplicative efforts later on, and can ultimately be both more efficient and more successful. I think there were some real concerns about retroactivity and sort of what planning this efforts this will apply to, and how to make it so that this isn't relevant only to planning that comes out in 25, 30 years. So how to take the landscape level view and incorporate it into periodic reviews for existing plans. And so there was some thoughts about doing landscape level planning and data gathering, and then using the key issues there to basically act as triggers or key issues where the planning folks in BLM can go to community groups on a regular basis. Let's say, if there's a regular periodic every 5 years that the plans need to be reviewed, and more regularly than that, go proactively to user groups and community groups and stakeholders and ask about those specific issues that come up as key flags in the landscape level planning, in order to incorporate them into existing planning efforts and existing plans. And this really fed into this idea of adaptive management. And so we can talk more about that if we need to. Some concerns also were, from the presentation, does it mean that key planning efforts are not happening, like travel management plans were one of the things that was raised as a big question on that level. We may come back to this if I skip something. In terms of this, and I should also say that the question of being more efficient and nimble and dynamic kind of fed into the topics of being more collaborative and thinking at a landscape scale. So that's sort of incorporated into these 2 pieces of paper. In terms of the goal of more collaboration, which we seem to also imply being able to be more dynamic and responsive. One concern, the big concern, was it can be harder for the public to track what's happening. If the more collaboration, more input you ask for, it can be hard. It can be exacting for community groups, and also it can really end up just involving the sort of organized public and maybe tokenizing some of the organized public and as opposed to the actual public. So that was a big question, how to make it meaningful, and there were some good ideas that came out of this group about that. And the question about, does a more tiered process result in more lawsuits, just more opportunity for more dispute and conflict? So that was one sort of question. In terms of ideas, there were some really good models in this group in different communities for BLM and other agencies going proactively to user groups and community groups and asking for help mapping, help data collecting, help inventorying, like with a local bike group in Lake County. And it really, the idea is not only does it give leverage resources and give more bang for less buck, I guess, but also, more importantly, builds investment, builds buy-in, and builds a more educated public that can be involved in an ongoing basis. And so asking for help and getting people involved earlier, so the landscape level planning sort of appealed on that level. The more you get people involved earlier and do sort of more comprehensive planning earlier, the idea in this group really, as there was some consensus around it, ultimately saves resources, and it's just smarter. So what else? There were some, in addition to the models around getting public stakeholders involved, there was a great suggestion about using an electronic newsletter as a way to not only solicit information, but also provide information about, for instance, how issues are evolving. What is the agency, what's the BLM hearing from people, and what kind of groups are weighing in on what issues? What are the next steps, deadlines? So really using technology as a pretty low-cost way to have two-way communication. And this idea that, yes, you're going to get more data. If you're more collaborative and you reach out at increased stages, you're going to get more input, you're going to get more data, but ultimately that probably will result in better decision-making and save time. So in general, there was some enthusiasm, I would say, from this group around a lot of the ideas that were discussed. What did I miss? Or what? Any elaboration? Phil, you're looking like you... Oh, wow, great, okay. I think any questions?
Yes? You? Yeah, here. Great. Okay. Quick. There you go.
Ditto. This group, we started talking about what's working, and what was said is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel necessarily, to take those things that are working and not throw the bathwater out with the baby. So consider thinking about how planning in ways with establishing the goals up front and making sure that the goals are well established. And all of this distilled down to these specifics in terms of asking for transparency, that there be more transparency in terms of data collection, how the data is used, and how people are informed about that. In terms of flexibility, being willing to be flexible. Let me see. Let's leave it at that. Flexibility. Consistency in terms of looking for how the data is used and incorporated into the decisions, and that there be consistency around that. Open to new ideas, which we're doing here today. People seem to be very appreciative of these forums and being able to be here and see who else is here and hear what these ideas are. Accountability for goals and objectives, and ensuring how the goals and objectives will be carried out, and who's going to be accountable for those. So there was discussion around that. Approachability in terms of being willing to hear the new ideas, to take them in, how that process works from all contingencies. And part of what we talked about that was, using technology again, so that these even people who are in the outlying areas are being heard. Collection of relevant data early in the process. So we had a lot of discussion about that in terms of how that data is used and how it's the proper use of the data. So using all the resources in terms of the information that's collected and how it's used. And monitoring and evaluation, again, in terms of this process. This is the landscape process is a new process, so there's a lot of unknowns, but there are some things that are already working, basically. And so to look at that and incorporate those aspects of it. Anything else? Thank you.
Well, this is interesting. There are themes. I guess you're hearing themes, right? About early data collection, about transparency. Let's see what else comes out in our next groups. Oh, you've got a mic. Okay.
Is it on now? Is that good? Okay, so my group said that they agreed to help me sound intelligent, and they will add and support what they came up with. The first thing is certain issues would benefit from a broader geographical scale and deeper analysis, and that adds consistency for plans that will then follow. So it is that piece that is the cumulative effect, right? The cumulative effect of the analysis that can then work across a broader section. Okay. They did express some concern about the prescriptive part of the plan. That if too much prescriptive is taken out, then it causes chaos in the vagueness. And in that vagueness, it has to do with the interim between when the plan comes out and when it's implemented, and there isn't any real way for people to know what it is that they're supposed to be doing if it's not prescriptive enough. Yeah. They also, like Ryan's group, would appreciate creating a timeline with expectations that are based and written in a enforceable policy, so that everybody knows what they're talking about in terms of timelines, because of the frustration experienced around, is it 2 years, is it 8 years? And so that would be a suggestion. In terms of what really impressed people about the proposed plan is this early pre-planning and early alternative outreach, as was already mentioned. There was a concern about how to get around FACA, which they assured me you would know what that is. Yeah, okay. But they felt that this may help with the political process, because if you had if you had more pre-planning and you had the alternative outreach and you had people input into the policy, into the planning, at the point where you're ready to move, the quote was, and I can't tell you who said this, right? Because that's part of our agreement, is that the commissioner could pick up the bat phone, and call somebody. So there might be better pressure on getting the political process moving. They also wanted to be sure that there would be a well-rounded representation in those planning sessions, and not the same old suspects, the same usual suspects is what they said, the usual suspects. A suggestion was made that it would be important to clarify the interface and coordinate with NEPA. that a lot of what BLM does has already been done by NEPA or vice versa, and it's duplicative. I see a frown. Is it? Okay. You want to clarify that?
Well, NEPA has planning processes used across the agencies, and in some ways that helps coordinate and communicate with publics on what's happening when. And just any proposal that comes out in the new planning regulations should just identify a clear interface with the NEPA planning processes, whether it's programmatic decision making or site specific.
Then a concern about how the BLM coordinates with other agencies such as the Forest Service. This group also wanted to know how the BLM will define the landscape boundaries, and at that point they would like to be asked for feedback once that has been put out to them. The next one, be sure that this doesn't add another layer for staff already spread thin and programs already underfunded. So even though it has great merit, if it's not going to be able to happen, if it's only going to put more pressure, more burden on the system, then it won't work. And the last one, use similar definitions across agencies, again for consistency and good communication. What else? Okay, great, thank you.
So as usual in times like this, I find myself inadequate and unworthy of the group, so forgive me. I also find that the less I say and the less I do, the better, so they did most of the work. To me, understanding about 10% of what they said, I identified themes with no real words in them. One would be, it's very important to proactively cooperate and collaborate across boundaries, even with this process itself. There are a lot of people in the room, there are people who are not in the room, and we should be reaching out to people who are not in the room, not just posting notices and hoping they show up. But that's also true within any kind of planning process moving forward. If we're working with other groups and making decisions that affect many, many people, many agencies, let's reach out to science, to the public, to the various layers of government, to different agencies, to the private landowners, to other organizations, reach out as much as possible to other folks. I think that was one of our themes. Another theme came up, clarify information. We mentioned the Chama Peak maps with values-based overlays. Make information clear to people. Somebody mentioned a translation manual that can be available, or has been made available to the public for certain kinds of, in certain kinds of settings. The underlying message there, I think, was that if BLM could learn English, it would probably be helpful to a lot of people. That's my interpretation of what was said. Look at best practices inside and outside of BLM. Look at state levels, look at other processes that have worked, look at ways that decisions are made, and reach out anywhere you can think of. There are a couple of examples up here. Look at other people's best practices and learn from them, so we incorporate the way other agencies, other groups are making decisions. And evaluate. Evaluate. For instance, I was pointed out to number 12 here, interactive and predetermined evaluation processes that include meaningful time frames to make adjustments, that include questions like, are we meeting our goal? So obviously we've got a lot of very specific things. Those are the broad themes that I identified, but I would invite, nay, indeed, I would beg that you elaborate on anything that needs elaboration.
Hi, John Belak, Defenders of Wildlife. I just wanted to point out number 2 on the middle chart there, which is BLM is basically hanging their hat on a lot of, there's a lot at stake to make sure that the data collection and analysis is going to be done appropriately. There's 6 core terrestrial indicators that they're planning on using as the basis for this. They need to add sufficient and appropriate other indicators to fully assess the resources that are being impacted here.
And building on the idea of reaching out to the public and making sure the material that comes from this new process is understandable to the public. Having public affairs staff that are dedicated to this process, they are involved in the development portion, in the rollout, and in the implementation of these RMPs. I think oftentimes putting down a record of decision on the table and asking the public to understand that is asking too much. And then I think an outstanding question is, with this new process, how are decisions going to be made? If you're going to have RMPs across field office boundaries, who's ultimately going to make decisions on what's placed in these records?
Are you done, table?
I think we're done.
We're done? So
Yes.
can you pass your mic on to the table? Oh, well, wait, we've done all. So now we need yes, Leishan needs a mic. So Leishan, you can explain what you're doing and what you did, will you?
Okay, so there are 19 people over here. I don't know if you can see them. We had a really good discussion, a little bit different. Obviously, our group wasn't in the room, but we had some similar, I'll keep it on my chin like Mary Margaret says. We had some similar themes. I don't know if you can, I was gonna show you my notes if I can. Well, maybe you can't see them, but I'll go over them for you. So to start with the dynamic and efficient planning process, the big thing that I think I heard from some of the other groups and that our group was focused on as well was the duplication of efforts. The idea of going out and collecting data, but maybe when you have the opportunity to go to different stakeholder groups and see if they have already collected some data and trying not to duplicate some of those efforts. Additionally, it was mentioned, some other processes were mentioned as feeling like they were overlapping, that they hindered efficiency. And so that was a big topic of conversation for us. Another one that we talked about for a while was this idea of, if the data is not available, can the plan offer other options for addressing those issues if there's not a data available to address it that way. And then enhancing opportunities for collaborative planning. That conversation really went in the direction of sharing the information. So if you want these smaller groups to feel like they have a place to participate, especially if you're looking at larger landscapes, making sure that if they have changing people involved, if they're from really small communities, that they really feel like they still have a voice and that they have access to information that makes them feel educated enough to then come to the table. And so that was a lot of discussion around what might that look like, and is it that online, sort of back and forth where you can connect to those groups out and about. Let's see. And then a couple other suggestions for smaller meetings throughout planning processes that are at that smaller community level again, so they're in maybe their library or somewhere that, again, they feel comfortable and like they have a place even in a process that may involve a much larger landscape. And then we talked about what has worked well, and that the main topic there was that things like the route evaluation, for instance, is something that helps get that a more detailed process that you could then take to a larger planning. So not losing that because it is working really well, and making sure that process like that has that local level detail and local level involvement doesn't get lost, and that value is continued on even in a larger landscape. And again, we already touched on public meetings throughout the different communities or with specific interest groups so that they can talk more particular to their areas and then bring that information together for a larger process. And then finally, the group said, we really wanted you to ask us specifically what didn't work well. And it wasn't necessarily that they had a lot of examples, but that they think as this conversation continues, that there's so much to learn from what hasn't worked well in the past. And they wanted to make sure that was really a big question that didn't get left out. So unfortunately, I don't have them to help me fix what was left out. So I hope I did an okay job.
Thank you, Leishan. And how about your group? Are you going to report for your group? Oh, you just had one group.
Oh yeah, we ended up, so quite a few people were watching, and then we ended up only having a total of 19 people call in. So we just had the one group.
All right. All right. So I'd like to give you all an opportunity right now to comment on what you heard from each other. I, in my way, have come up with some themes that I think we're going to see when we have our notes all together. And the themes include not sacrificing consistency and predictability and avoiding, in an effort to be efficient and to avoid vagueness and avoid getting too much, as we said here in this group, wiggle room. So that's one theme I heard from others. But transparency seemed to be a theme, outreach and how to do it well using using the web and other kinds of creative processes. How to make the process more user-friendly was a theme. Collection of data early on, doing resource evaluation early on, getting databases early on before projects start seemed to be important to people. What did you hear when you were listening to all of this, and who has thoughts either regarding the report back from your own group or from the others? And what did you see as themes? What did you find to be interesting?
Yeah, Jack Welch, Blue Ribbon Coalition. One thing we talked about, and I saw from the beginning when they were singling out in the starting presentations about eliminating travel management from the landscape goal. I'm just concerned that they will not get back to it, and I'm sure there are other things that could through lack of resources, lack of funding, timetable, but I think that's important. I think the other thing that I thought about with a similar effort by the Forest Service across districts was trying to get consistency in the implementation of the decisions, because each district, in the case of the Forest Service, felt that they had their plan in mind for their district, and we ended up with trails to nowhere. So I think it's important that all these things, it's great to try and do more, I call it with less, and be efficient, but you don't want to lose the important parts of the on-the-ground resource management plan.
I wonder if other people would like to add to that. I mean, it seemed to me that what Jack has just said is a theme. So if BLM is worried about being efficient and nimble, are you worried that they might be so efficient and nimble that you might lose something important? Anything else that people thought about? Is there a mic in the back? If not, I'll give this. Okay.
Yeah, throughout the process today, I haven't heard really anything in detail about how the BLM is going to structure modification of the specifics of RMPs with new information without having to go through a revision of the RMP itself. So how does that nimbleness get put into place? What are the tools to allow them to react to new information?
I wonder, is there anybody at BLM that would want to comment on that? Or should we just leave it for the next, we leave it for our record? So do you want to say some more about that right here? Yeah, good.
We thought about the same thing, or at least there was a discussion over here based around the retroactivity issue, and it's understandable if you've just redone an RMP that you don't want to go back and redo the whole thing. But the concern was that if these RMPs last 15 or 20 years or longer, that you create these islands of noncompliance, and and to the broader landscape level plan. And I guess one of the thoughts was, is there a way to create a process that takes these newer RMPs and checks them against the landscape level plan and sees if there are specific areas that can be addressed to bring them into compliance without redoing the whole RMP?
That's interesting, yeah. Do you want to add to this?
I mean, I think before you can do that, you have to define what the landscape is. And I mean, I think that what that group in the back said about defining the landscape and then putting that out for public comment is crucially important, and for public input. But because, I mean, that definition, I think, is really key to, you know, what this actually looks like.
Oh, she has a mic, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest, or the most basic question that our group was, discussing was what programs will be included in these landscape plans and which ones won't be. We've heard about, the travel management plans, but there are a whole host of things that BLM is responsible for, and so we'd like a better idea of, what BLM is looking at, including in these landscape plans and what they are planning on deferring later.
Okay, good. Yeah, we'll make some notes of these concerns and these comments. Anybody else? Okay, I mean, BLM, do you want to say, oh, sorry, go ahead. Say who you are.
Phil Hansford, the Wilderness Society. And one thing that we brought up was also continuing the theme of collaboration and public participation throughout the implementation as well, so that you have true adaptive management, not just broad agency discretion or flexibility. Maybe it was Jim. Somebody said that adaptive management does not equal, broad agency discretion. It has to be truly adaptive, based on monitoring and data, and so I think that was a theme throughout. So.
Good. Yeah, thank you. More? BLM, do you want to, anybody from BLM want to comment on what you heard, either by eavesdropping or hearing what we had Megan for a while helping us, which was good. If not, I'm going to go into next steps. And next steps include what you're going to get in about several weeks from these processes, these two meetings. On the website, by the end of October, the early November, there will be a report. And you may all have comments on it, which will be fine. But there will be a report that will be from this meeting and from the Sacramento meeting, kind of knitting your groups together and then knitting Sacramento and Denver together to give you all a picture of what people's responses were to Planning 2.0 as far as it is right now. And for those of you who left your emails and when you checked in today, we'll get back to you, BLM will get back to you and either give you a copy of that report or we'll give you the link one way or another, so you'll be able to have that. Shasta, do you want to say anything more about the timeline? That was one of the things. Oh, and I want to ask BLM something. Shasta, will the PowerPoint be on the website?
I don't think we've decided that. We probably could.
If you were
I don't
asked,
see why we couldn't.
if you were asked, could you put it on the website?
Sure,
Because
yeah,
there's
we'd
been
be
a
happy
request.
to.
There's been a request for that.
We'd be happy to.
Okay.
So just a few next steps that I wanted to mention. Mary Margaret mentioned this. We are doing a meeting in Sacramento next week, same format as this one, and that'll be live streamed. So if you'd like to tune in on the web, if you were in person on this one, or if you want to fly to Sacramento, all that information is on the website. Another thing that I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of is that we do have an email address where you can submit comments in writing. So if there's something that you think of after this meeting, something that you wanted to say and you didn't get the opportunity, you can send that via email and we will get that and we'll be monitoring that. It's BLM_WO_plan2 @blm.gov. That's on our website, so you can find it there. There's not an official deadline. You can continue to send us input. Obviously, the sooner you send it, the more time we have to use it. Our hope would be that people would be sending these, before the end of October, because we are moving forward in this process. But the sooner, the better. The other thing I wanted, did you have a question? So the question was, will there be a comment period after the draft handbook? I don't have an answer to that yet. We have been asked that several times, and we are very aware that people want to have that, and we're talking about it. So we'll have an answer for that at some point, but we're very aware that people want to do that. So a few other next steps that I just want to make sure everyone knows about. If you didn't get the emails we sent out, we put together a contact list. I've been adding people. If you'd like to be on that contact list, go to our website. There is a pre-registration for these meetings, and one option is you can just give your email address and don't register for the meetings. After the meetings are over, I'll change that form so that it's just to sign up for the contact list. I guess this is particularly important for the people who are tuning in from the live stream. We'll be sending updates whenever some future meetings, releases of anything that comes out. When the draft report, we'll notify you through that contact list. So just go ahead and sign up on that. And then the final thing is, in terms of the bigger picture next steps, I think the next big step that you can expect to see is when we come out with the proposed rule. Like we mentioned earlier, there will be a formal public comment period through the rulemaking process. We're expecting that'll be available to the public sometime, perhaps in the spring, maybe in the summer. And again, we are going to issue press releases and let all of you know and send notification. I'm sure there'll be a Federal Register component along with it. So are there any other questions or anything you guys want to say about next steps?
Any way you'd like to be followed up with, or any way that you want to know what BLM is doing between now and then? Okay. Okay, so what I would like to do is do a 1 minute, maybe 3 minute meeting evaluation. And this is important because we want to be able to do the best we can in Sacramento for the folks there too. So Ryan is going to write down pluses, like what did you like about this meeting? What went well? What do you think ought to be continued? What would you like to see? And over here is deltas. What didn't you like so much, or what would you like to see more of? What changes would you suggest? So anybody just speak up and tell us what you think. I don't think we have to have microphones for this, must we? We must have microphones, okay. Yeah. So anybody at this table, I can give you my microphone. Any comments about this meeting that you'd like to make, either what you liked or what you'd like to see more of?
It would be useful to provide the draft agenda and some discussion questions to the beforehand, so people have time to formulate responses.
More. One there and one here.
Well, considering for Sacramento, if you posted the handout that you provided, that would give people an idea, in Sacramento anyway, of what to expect.
Yeah, I brought up in our group, it would have been nice to have separate meeting rooms or because there was difficulty to hear and deal with the crowdedness, and so looks like you aren't getting very many positives, are you? It was a nice day.
I'll make a comment. I think that the facilitation of this meeting went very well, so I'll give you one positive. And I'll throw a delta up there for you guys as well, too. I felt like some of the thematic outcomes of these breakout sessions were echoing a lot of what BLM introduced that they would like to get out of this planning process. And maybe for Sacramento, a more productive approach could be to really spend some time thinking about successful planning processes that people have experienced in the past and drilling down in small groups about what made them successful, so that what you're pulling out is the successful elements of a good planning process instead of reinforcing themes like transparency and decision making and landscape level planning and all the things that we have said that we care about, but really getting down into the nuts and bolts of things that might actually help BLM come up with a draft plan for their handbook.
I'm monopolizing the microphone because I'm holding it. I really like the breakout sessions, and so I think that that's a really good format to carry forward. I thought it would be really useful for us to have had a BLM person who's been involved in this thought process at the table with us to clarify some of the confusion, because I think we could have provided more constructive input had we had a little bit more clarity going into the conversation.
Okay. Thanks, Vanessa. I can do this.
Yeah, just one thing that I wanted to mention was, I realize it's a tall order too, but I think there could be some examples incorporated into some of the presentation on what Planning 2.0 means. So specifically, you know, from one planning level to another, what is that going to look like? Maybe give an example of, you know, a hypothetical plan, something like that.
Could be proved wrong, but I think that there's a possibility you might get more and different ideas if you held more of these meetings in different locations to where more people have an opportunity, rather than just, you know, 2 locations and the few that show up.
Are you thinking rural, more urban, or does that not come into it?
That could come into it, yes.
So it could come into it to make it rural and urban. Okay. Well, we don't need to keep you here any longer unless anybody has anything they want to say to us as they leave. Please do so. But thank you an awful lot. I mean, this was a very big meeting, and you all were extremely participatory, and thanks a lot. Appreciate your being here. Bye.